I have known of our keynote speaker since long before she became Arianna Huffington. In 1981, I read a riveting biography of Maria Callas, one of the most successful women in the world, written by a young, beautiful, and glamorous Arianna Stasnopoulos. It was riveting for so many reasons, including its discussions of passion, money, power, and sex. That's the one I wanted to see. When I met Arianna for the first time in 2004, I told her that I'd read her book on Maria Callas, and she looked very surprised and said to me, "But I wrote that a long time ago." In the intervening 23 years, Arianna had written 7 more books. And she mounted a very impressive campaign to become governor of California. And she characterized her candidacy against the frontrunner Arnold Schwarzenegger as hybrid versus Hummer. Arianna has been a trailblazer in so many ways for so many years. She was an early adopter of hybrid technology. She was one of the first people ever to drive a Prius, and she single-handedly made driving a Prius seriously cool. You all know Arianna as the chair, president, and editor-in-chief of the Huffington Post Media Group. In May of 2005, Arianna launched the Huffington Post, a news site on the internet, of course, that is the most admired, most linked to, most cited media outlet on the internet, certainly on the planet. And in 2012, the Huffington Post won a Pulitzer Prize for national reporting. Arianna has been listed on the Forbes list of the most powerful women in the world. She's on the Times list of the 100 most influential people in the world. But the real proof that she made it came a couple of years ago when she was impersonated and parodied on Saturday Night Live. And in a real tribute to her beauty and glamour, the comedian who portrayed her is the same one who does Kim Kardashian. Arianna was living in Los Angeles when I first met her, and I was living in Houston. Small world that it is. Our daughters ended up at the same college in Connecticut, and shortly thereafter, Arianna and I both found a way to move to New York, allegedly for business, also putting us closer to our daughters, which has been a wonderful advantage. So I have seen Arianna as the mother of 2 accomplished and high-achieving, outstanding daughters, Christina and Isabella. And I will tell you, they are apples that have not fallen far from the tree. In the 10 years since I met Arianna, she has written 5 more books, bringing her total to a whopping 14. The books have all been bestsellers. They are written with true gravitas, not surprising for a Cambridge University graduate. And they're on a wide array of topics from politics to women. So it is little wonder that when we were looking for a keynote speaker, the person at the top of our list was Arianna Huffington, a successful journalist, businesswoman, mother, and tireless advocate for women. Arianna is going to talk to us today about her 14th book, Thrive, the 3rd metric to redefining success and creating a life of well-being, wisdom, and wonder. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, Mary, with your wonderful allusion to the importance of overcoming fear, that several books ago, Arianna had another best-selling book on overcoming fear. But today she's going to talk to us about Thrive. And with Arianna's consent, I am permitted to tell you that this coming Sunday, the book will be #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. So please give. So please give a big, big, big Texas welcome to Arianna Huffington.
Thank you so much, Linda, for this wonderful introduction. Thank you all for what has already been an incredibly inspiring time. I learned so much, and I admire so much all the work you have been doing here to help younger women and older women achieve all their potential. Madeleine Albright famously said that there is a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. And I'm sure there is nobody in this room who is going there. I also feel a little bit like I'm coming home because, hi Karen. I met many of you from Houston, and my ex-husband is from Houston. And I'm very close to my in-laws and my sister-in-law and my ex-husband, actually, but that's another speech. And so I feel as I have two half-Texan daughters that I'm partly Texan, and I spoke to many of you about different parts of Houston that we love. So for those of you who have not heard me before, you know, this accent is for real. It's been a little bit of the bane of my existence when you were talking about overcoming fears and finding our own self-confidence. Definitely dealing with my accent was an issue for me until I met Henry Kissinger. And he said to me never to worry about your accent. In American public life, he said, you can never overestimate the advantages of complete and total incomprehensibility. So I want to add my congratulations to Mary. And Mary, I took copious notes as you were speaking, and I would love to have the transcript of your speech to publish on the Huffington Post, because it is absolutely perfect. And interestingly enough, everything you said fits perfectly with the message of Thrive. And I will tell you exactly how. I wrote Thrive, which, as Linda mentioned, was my 14th book, and it was the kind of surprise baby I never thought I would have. And I wrote it because I saw that my own personal journey was intersecting where the world was going. And Mary talked about a tipping point, and I do believe there is a tipping point. My own personal journey started in terms of Thrive 7 years ago, and that's how I begin the book, when I collapsed from exhaustion, burnout, and sleep deprivation, hit my head on my desk, broke my cheekbone, and got 4 stitches on my right eye. And that was the beginning of asking myself a lot of questions that we stop asking ourselves in college. Questions like, what is a good life? What is success? And I realized that while by conventional definitions of success I was successful, by any sane definition of success, if you are lying in a pool of blood on the floor of your office, you're not successful. And then I looked around and I saw that millions of people were burnt out. And that women in particular, as we are trying to scale the ladder of our careers while maintaining families and being mothers and volunteering in our community, were particularly burnt out. And I looked at the medical data that shows that women also process stress differently. And we have women in stressful jobs, which includes everybody in this room, have a 40% greater incidence of heart disease and a 60% greater threat of diabetes. So I began to look at our world generally and come to the conclusion that we are living in a world designed by men. All the men in this room are excluded. They had nothing to do with it. And that we are in need of a third women's revolution, which paradoxically is the only way we can also complete the second women's revolution. The first women's revolution was about giving us the vote. The second women's revolution was about giving us equal access to all the jobs, including law, and the top of every field. The third women, and it's an incomplete revolution. That's why you have the center, to help women get to the top of every legal field. But I don't believe we're going to achieve that without the third women's revolution, which is basically women saying, you know, we don't want just to be at the top of every law firm and every corporate practice and at the top of the world generally, we want to change the world. Because the way the world was designed by men is not working. It's not working for women, it's not working for men, and it is certainly not working for polar bears. So, incidentally, when we change the world, men, you're going to be so grateful to us. Because for some reason, we have all been living under a collective delusion. And Mary talked about the courage to ignore millennials of conditions and stereotypes. Well, we need to have the courage to ignore this collective delusion, which says that in order to succeed, you have to burn out. That exhaustion, burnout, and sleep deprivation are just the price of success, and that's a fact, because it is not. And what is so exciting about this moment is that for the first time, we have the scientific evidence. I have 55 pages of endnotes, scientific endnotes, because I wanted to convince even the most stubborn skeptic that contrary to our collective delusion, if we actually take care of our human capital, we are going to be better at everything, including our jobs. Our performance will be enhanced. As Donna Shalala said to me, I was speaking at the University of Miami, the president of the university now, she said to me, basically, you're either going to take time off to nurture yourself, or the time off will be imposed on you through sickness, and we see that all around us, through mental health issues, through addiction, through alcoholism, through all the casualties that we're seeing all around us. And she also said, and I love that, he said, if you're going to lead, you cannot lead while you're tired. And I just love her because Mary also talked about the flowering of women leaders. We need more role models who are at the top of the world but doing it in this new way. And Donna Shalala is one of them. She said, when I was in the Clinton administration, she was the longest serving human services secretary. She said, I would be woken up regularly by the president at midnight. Maybe, Karen, I bet that didn't happen. That didn't happen with President Bush, right? So he would... I don't often have Karen in the audience to check these things with. So she said she would regularly be woken up by the president to be asked some recondite question on Medicare or whatever policy they were about to institute. She said, I had to sleep with my briefing books. And it was clear that this was not exactly a very effective way to lead, because you create chaos. And men are adolescents in many ways, and they like to I say everything I say about men exempts everybody here, okay? And it is said without malice, okay? Any other provisos I have to legally make before I proceed? So it is not actually an effective way to lead. In fact, I quote President Clinton in the book, saying that the most important mistakes I made in my life, I made them when I was tired. He did not specify what mistakes. But the bottom line is that we can all say the same. When I look back on my career, I can say the most important mistakes I made. Mistakes of hiring the wrong people because I was too rushed and burnt out and I just wanted to cross this off my to-do list. Mistakes of overreacting when something goes wrong, and doesn't something go wrong every day in our lives? All these mistakes could have been avoided. And when I talk to many successful women, we've come to the same conclusion. I was recently interviewed by Oprah for a Super Soul Sunday show that will air on Mother's Day. And she said to me at the beginning of building the Oprah show, she said, I was so exhausted, I would go to bed at night and I didn't have the energy to take my clothes off. So I would sleep with my clothes on. And we both agreed that if she had given herself an hour to have a shower and change, she would still have been Oprah today. Can we all agree on that? But what happens is that very often we work hard, we are rewarded, and we think, hey, if we work even harder, we're going to be rewarded more. But there are diminishing returns. And now, ironically, athletes are ahead of us in realizing that, which is why I have all these examples in the book of star athletes who have introduced sleep and meditation and yoga into their practice because they are better on the court. And there was an interesting interview that Charlie Rose had with Andy Murray, the great tennis player. And Andy Murray said, when I'm recharged on the court, it's as though the ball is coming at me in slow motion. And those of you who are trial lawyers, isn't it great when everything is coming at you in slow motion as opposed to coming at you in an overwhelming way when you don't have time to respond? So I looked around for an entry point so that people could make these changes in their lives, and especially women, without having to have a wake-up call like I had, or even worse in many cases. And I realized that the entry point that could make this a much faster adoption had to do with redefining success. Because if we continue to define success in terms of money and power, it will be like continuing to try and sit on a two-legged stool. Sooner or later, we're going to fall off. That's why I came up with this idea of the third metric of success, which consists of 4 pillars. The first is well-being and health, which is what we just talked about. This is the foundation. The book is dedicated to my mother because she understood that early on. And when we were living in a one-room apartment in Athens, Greece, having no money, my mother knew that the biggest priority was taking care of her daughter's human capital, which meant good food and a good education, and she didn't care about anything else. She had 2 dresses. She cared about nothing else, but that was her priority. And when a successful businessman, I remember, came to dinner one night and bragged about this great new contract he had gotten to build a museum in northern Greece, my mother looked at him and said, you know what? Your business may be doing well, but you are taking too many withdrawals from your health bank without making enough deposits. And you'll pay a price for that. She was like Cassandra, looked at him. And 2 months later, the man had a heart attack. And we look around at the number of people who have heart attacks in their 50s, and we think somehow that's how life is. But 75% of healthcare costs in America are for preventable chronic stress-related diseases. 25% is genetic, but 75% is based on the way we live our lives. So this is not a sustainable future. And there is so much that women can do to actually change in very little ways the way we approach our careers and our lives so that we can actually succeed without burning out. The second pillar is wisdom. And that's very relevant, especially to women, because so often we listen to the voice of the obnoxious roommate living in our head that puts us down. Men have that voice too, but men can actually silence it more easily and go watch a game. My obnoxious roommate is particularly sardonic. I was on Stephen Colbert's show recently, and I told him that, Stephen, you know what? My obnoxious roommate sounds exactly like you. And he said I had to find a place to crash. So learning to evict the obnoxious roommate is absolutely key for women in law, for women in careers where they are going to be faced not just with institutional barriers, but with our own self-doubts. And related to that is the question of trust. Trusting ourselves and trusting that whatever happens in life, even the negative stuff, is there for a reason. I have a lot of poetry spread around the book, and one of my favorite quotes is from Rumi, who said, live life as though everything is rigged in your favor. Because very often, I see that from young women, they get so easily discouraged. If everything doesn't go exactly their way immediately, they take this as a personal affront. And if we can actually change the way we approach what life brings us, so that we see everything as some kind of hidden blessing, that we may not be able to see the point as it is happening, but we'll be able to see it in retrospect. And in order to be able to do that, we need to learn to disconnect from our devices and reconnect with ourselves. I'm not going to ask you how many of you sleep with your smartphones by your bed, but I bet it's a high percentage. And I'm not going to ask you how many of you, when you wake up in the middle of the night, are tempted to look at your data, because this is not something that is consistent with recharging. And you'll read the scientific data that shows that if you do that, you're not going to be as recharged and renewed when you wake up in the morning. And really, that's what we're talking about. We're not going to work less hard. We are going to work smarter. And that means with pauses and spaces and renewal opportunities. And you know, I love this sculpture because I think this space is what we need to introduce in our lives. And that is what is missing. And as I've been going around the world, because the Huffington Post is now in 11 countries, in every country I go, there's some ancient wisdom around creating these breathing spaces in our lives. And we're very bad at that. We kind of crowd everything in, and we both lose the opportunities to renew ourselves, and we lose the opportunities to bring joy into our everyday lives. And Linda particularly asked me to mention the gazelles, because in the book I write about how gazelles are my role model, because gazelles are like powerful women lawyers. They basically run very hard when they have to. But when they don't have to run anymore, they just graze. They are not in a constant fight or flight mode, which is how we often live our lives. Even when we don't have to work hard, our minds don't stop. They kind of keep looking at the future, and when we look at the future, we normally look at the future with worries. Montaigne, the great French philosopher, said there were many terrible things in my life, but most of them never happened. But our mind doesn't know that. Our mind doesn't make a distinction between the bad things that happen and the bad things that we merely thought are going to happen. And being in a perpetual fight or flight mode means that we never decompress. And that's how burnout happens. So, as I've been going around the country, I have been stunned by the number of people who have come up to me and in one way or another said to me what one young woman said to me in San Francisco, who was actually a lawyer with 2 children. She said to me, "I don't remember the last time I was not tired." And just this is not an acceptable way to live. And those of us who are in positions to affect our offices, we need to do something about it. And that will help younger women, not just to rise in the profession, but to stay in the profession. We are losing so much talent because so many women leave because they don't see how they can combine everything, because of the way we thought doing our job had to be done. And then so many women live in their 50s. I got to know Erika Rothenberg, who was the general counsel at LinkedIn, and I was speaking at LinkedIn 2 weeks ago. And she talked, we put it up on the Huffington Post too, she talked about how she tried to introduce the third metric into her life. And she said, I started taking hikes and walks, and one day she said I was doing an important conference call, and I saw a mountain lion, and I started making incredible noises that confused everybody on the call. But she said, I wanted to bring some space into my life. Lawyers and mountain lions. It's an interesting short story. So I wanted to bring some space in my life, not just over the weekends, but during the week. And she said to me, in 2 weeks, she said, you will see something that I'm doing. And 2 days ago, she resigned as general counsel because she wants to have another chapter in her life. And a lot of women, I talked already to 2-3 women here who are thinking of doing something similar. And that's great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's everything right with that, because it's, again, redefining success to include every aspect of our lives. but we can also do our job in a way that does not require us leaving it, because we can bring different dimensions of ourselves and of our work into play, including the third pillar of success, which is wonder, a sense of wonder. I mean, I'm not getting on a plane to go back to New York without seeing the blue button flowers, bluebell, blue bonnet flowers. That's so much nicer. So you have to tell me the closest place where I can go see the blue bonnet flowers. And what I mean by that is that there are blue bonnet flower equivalents all across our day, but so often we are so buried in our to-do lists and our smartphones that we miss them. And when we actually allow ourselves to focus on them, we bring in a sense of recharging, even if it is just for 10 seconds into our lives. I began to bring about these changes in my life gradually since my collapse. And they are transformational. I was doing a television show this morning, and I left the show, and I realized normally I would immediately go onto my phone or get on a call. And instead, I just walked and breathed in the air and had like 3 minutes of being completely present and recharging. You may think that's no big deal, but look at your life and see how often do you do that. And I now have introduced a little more silence in my life. Like I used to walk into my apartment or a hotel room, and before I even took off my coat, I would turn on the television because I felt, hey, I'm running a 24/7 media company, I need to be constantly on. And I learned 2 things. The first is that I haven't missed a thing. And the second thing is that I have actually gained so much by being more connected to my own wisdom and intuition. I remember when I tuned in to a Rachel Maddow show 3 weeks after I had not watched any TV at random like that. They were talking about Chris Christie and the George Washington Bridge, and I thought I was watching a rerun. It was just like the same story, with just like minor developments, not to mention the Malaysian Airlines story. That is like a complete outrage. You know, the breaking news that is so absolutely nothing to do with breaking news. I have stopped turning on the TV. When I say, in my office, I have the TV on mute, and I work, and then I used to kind of turn on up the volume when I saw breaking news, but I don't do that anymore because I don't believe it. The time I stopped doing it was during the last election when breaking news came on, and it turned out it was Donald Trump is going to endorse Mitt Romney. And I thought, really? Who cares? So the fourth and final pillar is giving, because that's what really rounds up our lives. And everybody's here because you're givers and you believe in doing something beyond our own lives and our own careers. And at the end of each of these sections in the book, I have 3 little steps that we can take right now to begin to bring about these incremental changes. And at the end of the giving section, the first change I recommend is just beginning to look at everyone we come into contact with in a way that does not take them for granted. Whether it's the checkout clerk, the cleaning crew in our office, the barista in the coffee shop, it's amazing how much it expands our humanity and how present it brings us. Another little step at the end of the wonder chapter that brings us really present in our lives is giving up every day something that no longer serves us. It could be a grudge, resentment. I quote Carrie Fisher saying, resentment is the poison you drink thinking somebody else is going to die. Anger, or a project that we thought one day we're going to do, and we realize, you know what, we're not really. I mean, I did this life audit. At the beginning of each year, I do a life audit, and one of the things on my list was learning to cook, learning to become a good skier, learning German. And I looked at them and I said, you know what? I'm never going to do any of these things. So I realized something very profound, which is that you can complete a project by dropping it. So I highly recommend that. And I just want to wrap it all up by saying that we have, if we're lucky, 30,000 days to play the game of life. How we play it depends on what we value. And if we only value money and power, we are never going to have enough. And if you've been to a friend's memorial recently, you realize that eulogies have very little to do with our resumes. In fact, eulogies have very little to do with our LinkedIn profiles. Have you ever been to a eulogy where you heard something like, George was amazing, he increased market share by 1/3? And the paradox here is that when we realize that we are not defined by our jobs, we are going to be much better at our jobs. Because that's when we take the kind of risks that everybody on the stage talked about today, because we are not afraid of failing, because if we fail, it doesn't mean that we are an utter and complete failure at the core of our being, which is what people feel when they identify completely with their jobs. And I'm collecting stories of people who've done that, people who we admire and who may have forgotten that they did that. And when I was doing an interview with Ellen, she reminded me how when she was the big success in her sitcom, she came out and she knew this was a big risk. And indeed, her show was canceled and the phone did not ring for 3 years. But she did what was right and true for her, and then she thrived, to coin a phrase. Charlie Rose said to me the same thing. When he was a host of a big show on Fox in LA in the early 90s, making $1 million a year, he felt completely unfulfilled, hated having to ask starlets what they had for breakfast. And he resigned. He had nothing else to go to. He went to his farm in North Carolina and dreamed up the Charlie Rose show. So what I'm saying is that when we completely identify with our job, we are not going to take the big risks or the small risks that will lead us to actually do our job better or do what we actually want and love to do. So this is the ultimate paradox. And that's why I believe that when we find that place in us that every religion and every spiritual philosophy has talked about in different words, that place of wisdom and strength and peace and joy, when we find that place, then we will really be able to create a world in our own professions that is more in our own image and redefine success in a more humane way so that we can live our lives with more joy, more compassion, and yes, more sleep. Thank you.